Olivia pressed her trembling hands against the marble countertop as Mrs. Catherine. Blackwood's voice echoed through the pristine kitchen, each word cutting deeper than the last. A maid playing house with my grandson? You think scrubbing toilets qualifies you to raise a Blackwood heir? The 26-year-old domestic worker had endured 3 years of invisible servitude in this Connecticut mansion. But nothing had prepared her for this moment standing, accused of being unfit to mother the child she hadn't even planned to conceive. The morning had started like any other in the Blackwood estate. Olivia arrived at dawn, her worn sneakers silent against the imported Italian floors as she began her routine. She moved through the 40-room mansion with practiced efficiency, dusting antique furniture worth more than most people's homes, her presence as overlooked as the air itself. The family treated her like a piece of functional furniture, necessary but unworthy of acknowledgement beyond the occasional sharp instruction. She had been cleaning the library when she first noticed the change in her body 3 weeks ago. The familiar nausea, the exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, the way certain smells made her stomach revolt. Olivia had sat in the staff bathroom, staring at the positive pregnancy test with a mixture of terror and unexpected joy. The father was David Blackwood, the family's younger son. A brief romance that had bloomed during his mother's extended European vacation 6 months prior. David worked as a pediatric surgeon at Boston Children's Hospital, visiting the family estate only on weekends. The relationship had developed slowly, built on stolen conversations in the garden while Olivia tended to the roses, and quiet moments in the kitchen after the family retired for the evening. He was gentle and kind. So different from his imperious mother and ambitious older brother. When Catherine returned from Europe, they had agreed to keep their relationship secret, knowing the explosive reaction it would provoke. The Blackwood matriarch ruled her domain with iron precision. Catherine had married into oil money, transforming herself from a middle-class teacher into the epitome of high society refinement. She orchestrated charity galas, sat on museum boards, and ensured the family name appeared in all the right social columns. The thought of her precious son involved with hired help was her worst nightmare materialized. Olivia had planned to tell David about the pregnancy during his next visit, but Catherine had discovered their relationship first. Someone, perhaps the gardener or the cook, had whispered about seeing them together. The confrontation had been swift and merciless, with Catherine demanding Olivia's immediate termination and threatening legal action if she dared claim any connection to the family. Now, as she faced the older woman's wrath in the kitchen, Olivia felt something shift inside her. The protective instinct that had awakened with her pregnancy refused to be silenced by threats and intimidation. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Catherine's cold gaze with unexpected resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the life growing inside her. A life that deserved better than shame and denial. The mansion's silence was deceptive, concealing years of dysfunction beneath its polished surface. David struggled with his mother's controlling nature, torn between family loyalty and his own values. His older brother Richard lived to please Catherine, sacrificing his own happiness for her approval. The household staff walked on eggshells, having witnessed too many employees dismissed for minor infractions. Olivia had observed it all during her 3 years of service. She understood the family dynamics better than they realized, having cleaned up after their arguments, witnessed their private moments of vulnerability, and overheard countless phone conversations that revealed their true characters. Her invisible status had made her privy to secrets that could shatter the family's carefully constructed image. Catherine paced the kitchen with predatory grace, her designer heels clicking against the stone floor. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her navy suit spoke of understated wealth. She had built her life on appearances and control, and Olivia represented everything she despised: uncertainty, scandal, and the potential destruction of her carefully laid plans for David's future. The pregnancy had changed everything for Olivia. The constant fatigue made her daily tasks more challenging, but it also awakened something powerful within her. She found herself noticing things she had missed before, the way children on television moved. The developmental milestones mentioned in the parenting magazines she glimpsed in the family's collection, the subtle signs of emotional needs in the people around her. Her own childhood had been marked by instability and neglect. Raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs, Olivia had learned early to be self-sufficient and observant. She had always been good with children, volunteering at the local community center when time permitted, but she had never considered it a skill worth mentioning. Now, with a child of her own on the way, those dormant instincts were awakening with startling clarity. Catherine's voice grew sharper as she outlined her demands. Olivia would be given a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. She would leave immediately and never contact David or claim any connection to the Blackwood family. The alternative was legal action that would destroy her reputation and leave her with nothing. But as Olivia listened to the ultimatum, she realized something that surprised even her. She wasn't afraid anymore. The life growing inside her had given her a purpose that transcended her fear of Catherine's threats. She would fight for her child's right to exist, to be acknowledged, and to be loved, even if it meant challenging one of the most powerful families in Connecticut. The next morning brought an unexpected development that shifted the entire dynamic of the household. David arrived unannounced, his usually composed demeanor shattered by exhaustion and worry. He had received Olivia's text message about needing to talk, sent before Catherine's confrontation, and had driven through the night from Boston to reach the estate. His mother's carefully orchestrated plan to remove Olivia before his arrival had failed. Olivia watched from the second-floor landing as mother and son faced each other in the grand foyer below. Their voices carried up the marble staircase, Catherine's controlled fury clashing with David's mounting anger. She had never seen him stand up to his mother with such force. His surgeon's precision turned toward defending what he called the only real relationship I've ever had. The household staff moved like ghosts through their duties, acutely aware of the seismic shift occurring around them. Margaret, the head cook who had worked for the family for 15 years, gave Olivia meaningful looks throughout the morning. Thomas, the groundskeeper, found excuses to check on her welfare. Even Sarah, the younger maid who usually avoided any drama, whispered words of support when Catherine was out of earshot. Catherine's strategy became clear as the day progressed. She would not simply dismiss Olivia. That approach had failed with David's intervention. Instead, she would systematically prove that the young woman was unsuitable for motherhood. Too immature and uneducated to raise a child properly, especially a Blackwood heir. The battle lines were drawn with surgical precision. David's presence complicated everything. He was torn between protecting Olivia and managing his mother's fury, trying to find a solution that wouldn't destroy the family completely. His medical training made him acutely aware of Olivia's needs during the pregnancy, but his family obligations created impossible constraints. The stress was visible in his tired eyes and the tension that never left his shoulders. Olivia found herself observing the family with new intensity. She watched how Catherine interacted with David's 6-year-old nephew during his visit that afternoon. The boy, Richard's son from his first marriage, was clearly struggling with his parents' recent divorce. But Catherine's approach was rigid and dismissive. She corrected his posture constantly, criticized his table manners, and seemed more concerned with his appearance than his emotional state. The child's name was Timothy, and Olivia had always felt drawn to him during his previous visits. He was quiet and sensitive, often seeking refuge in the kitchen where she would let him help with simple tasks while she worked. Today, She noticed signs she had missed before, the way he flinched when adults raised their voices, how he withdrew when criticized, the sadness that shadowed his young face. Catherine's treatment of Timothy revealed something crucial about her understanding of child rearing. She viewed children as projects to be perfected, rather than individuals to be nurtured. Her approach was all about external compliance and social presentation, with little regard for emotional development or genuine connection. Olivia realized she was witnessing a preview of how her own child might be treated if Catherine gained any influence over the situation. The pregnancy symptoms intensified under the stress. Olivia found herself struggling with morning sickness that extended well into the afternoon, her energy depleted by the emotional turmoil surrounding her. But rather than weakening her resolve, the physical challenges seemed to sharpen her focus on what really mattered, creating a safe, loving environment for her unborn child. David tried to speak with her privately several times throughout the day, but Catherine's surveillance made meaningful conversation impossible. The older woman had enlisted Richard's help in monitoring the situation, and Olivia felt like a specimen under a microscope. Every action was scrutinized, every word analyzed for weakness or unsuitability. The staff dynamics shifted in subtle but significant ways. Those who had always treated Olivia as invisible suddenly saw her as a person with agency and rights. Their small gestures of support, an extra cup of tea from Margaret, a reassuring smile from Thomas, Sarah's offer to take on some of Olivia's heavier tasks, created an unexpected network of allies within the household hierarchy. Catherine's first test came during Timothy's afternoon visit. She orchestrated a scenario where Olivia would be responsible for watching the boy while she and David discussed important family matters. It was clearly designed to highlight Olivia's inadequacy in handling a distressed child. But Catherine had underestimated both Olivia's natural instincts and Timothy's need for genuine connection. The boy was having a difficult day, overwhelmed by his parents' ongoing custody battle and confused by the tension in the house. Catherine's attempts to manage his behavior had only made things worse, leading to tears and defiance that she dismissed as attention-seeking dramatics. When left with Olivia, Timothy was a bundle of raw emotion and confused needs. Instead of trying to impose order like Catherine expected, Olivia sat with Timothy in the garden where they had spent many peaceful moments before. She listened to his fears about his parents' divorce, validated his feelings of confusion and sadness, and helped him understand that the adult problems around him weren't his fault. Her approach was intuitive rather than textbook-based, but it was exactly what the child needed. Within an hour, Timothy had calmed completely. He was helping Olivia tend to the herb garden, chattering about his favorite subjects at school, and sharing the stories he made up about the garden's resident rabbits. His transformation was so complete that when Catherine came to check on them, expecting to find chaos, she discovered instead a peaceful scene of connection and genuine joy. The success with Timothy created the first crack in Catherine's certainty about Olivia's unsuitability. She had expected incompetence and had instead witnessed something that resembled actual parenting skill. It was a small victory, but it planted a seed of doubt that would grow as the situation evolved. That evening brought another revelation that further complicated the family dynamics. Richard's ex-wife called to discuss Timothy's increasing behavioral problems at home and school. The conversation, overheard by multiple family members, revealed that the boy had been struggling significantly since the divorce, with teachers and counselors expressing concern about his emotional state. Catherine's solution was predictably focused on external management private tutors, stricter discipline, enrollment in a more prestigious school that would challenge him appropriately. David's medical background made him more aware of the psychological aspects of the child's distress. But his suggestions for therapy and emotional support were dismissed as coddling by his mother. Olivia realized she was witnessing the same dynamic that would likely affect her own child. Catherine's approach to problems was always about control and appearance rather than understanding and genuine care. The pattern was clear, and it strengthened her resolve to ensure her baby would never be subjected to such cold, calculated guidance. The crisis exploded on a Tuesday morning when Catherine announced her solution to the family situation. She had contacted her lawyers and arranged for Olivia to receive a substantial financial settlement. In exchange for relinquishing all parental rights and agreeing to a permanent restraining order that would prevent any future contact with the Blackwood family. The paperwork was already prepared, requiring only Olivia's signature to resolve what Catherine termed this unfortunate misunderstanding. David's reaction was immediate and volcanic. The argument that erupted in the library could be heard throughout the mansion. Years of suppressed resentment finally finding voice as he confronted his mother's manipulative control over every aspect of his life. He accused her of treating people like chess pieces, of valuing the family reputation over human decency, and of trying to force him into the same loveless, calculating existence that had defined her own marriage. Catherine's response revealed the steel beneath her polished exterior. She reminded David of his financial dependence on the family trust, his position at the hospital that had been secured through Blackwood connections, and the scandal that would destroy his medical career if his relationship with the help became public knowledge. Her threats were delivered with surgical precision, each one designed to target his vulnerabilities and obligations. Olivia found herself at the center of a generational conflict that had been building for decades. David's rebellion against his mother's control had finally found a catalyst, but the costs were potentially devastating for everyone involved. She realized that her pregnancy had become the flashpoint for a much larger battle about autonomy, love, and the right to choose one's own path in life. The household staff watched the drama unfold with a mixture of fascination and fear. They had witnessed smaller skirmishes between Catherine and her sons over the years, but nothing approaching this level of open warfare. The stability of their employment suddenly seemed uncertain, dependent on the outcome of a conflict that threatened to tear the family apart completely. Richard arrived that afternoon. Summoned by his mother to help manage what she characterized as David's temporary breakdown, his presence added another layer of complexity to the situation as he attempted to mediate between his brother's demands and their mother's ultimatums. His own divorce had left him emotionally drained and financially dependent on Catherine's goodwill, making him an unreliable ally for either side. Timothy's presence during this volatile period created additional pressure for everyone involved. The 6-year-old was acutely sensitive to the emotional turmoil around him, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic as the adults in his life failed to provide the stability he desperately needed. His distress served as a stark reminder of what was at stake, not just Olivia's future, but the emotional well-being of the next generation. Catherine's strategy evolved throughout the day, shifting from outright threats to more subtle forms of psychological warfare. She began questioning Olivia's motives publicly, suggesting that the pregnancy might be a calculated attempt to access the family fortune. She highlighted the vast differences in their backgrounds, education levels, and social standing, painting the relationship as inherently unstable and doomed to failure. The attacks on her character hit Olivia harder than the financial threats had. Catherine's words awakened old insecurities about her worthiness and capabilities, doubts that had been suppressed but never fully resolved. She began questioning her own motives and qualifications, wondering if Catherine might be right about her unsuitability for raising a child in their world. David's support remained unwavering, but his position was increasingly precarious. The hospital had already received anonymous complaints about his unprofessional conduct, clearly generated by his mother's network of influential contacts. His department chair had requested a private meeting to discuss concerns about his judgment and reliability, code words that signaled potential disciplinary action. The financial pressure was equally intense. Catherine controlled the family trust that funded David's lifestyle and charitable activities. His salary as a pediatric surgeon was substantial by normal standards, but insufficient to maintain his current commitments without family support. The threat of financial independence meant abandoning his research projects, his pro bono work with underprivileged children, and potentially his position at the prestigious hospital. Olivia watched the man she loved being systematically dismantled by his own family, each pressure point activated with ruthless efficiency. She realized that Catherine was not just fighting to remove her from the picture, she was waging war against any challenge to her absolute authority over her children's lives. The pregnancy was simply the latest battleground in a much longer campaign. The stress began affecting Olivia's health in ways that couldn't be ignored. Her blood pressure spiked during a routine checkup that David had insisted upon, leading to concerns about preeclampsia and the need for careful monitoring. The irony was bitter. The family's attempts to prove her unfit for motherhood were creating the very health complications that could threaten the pregnancy. Margaret, the cook, became an unexpected source of wisdom during this crisis period. She had raised 4 children as a single mother while working for wealthy families, and she recognized the signs of a woman being backed into an impossible corner. Her quiet conversations with Olivia provided perspective on the long game that Catherine's victory would be temporary, if Olivia remained strong and focused on what truly mattered. Timothy's deteriorating behavior provided another lens through which to view the family dynamics. His tantrums increased in frequency and intensity, his sleep patterns became erratic, and his teachers reported concerning changes in his social interactions. Catherine's response was to increase restrictions and discipline, completely missing the emotional distress that was driving his actions. Olivia's interactions with the troubled boy became a source of strength for both of them. She understood his confusion and fear because she was experiencing her own version of family upheaval. Their connection deepened as they found comfort in each other's company, creating moments of peace amid the surrounding chaos. The situation reached a crescendo when Catherine presented her final ultimatum. Olivia had 24 hours to sign the settlement agreement and leave the estate permanently, or the family would pursue legal action claiming she had engaged in fraud, theft, and extortion. The threat was clearly designed to intimidate rather than based on actual evidence, but the potential consequences were real enough to create genuine fear. The 24-hour deadline created a pressure cooker atmosphere that pushed everyone involved to their breaking points. David made a desperate attempt to circumvent his mother's control by seeking an emergency loan against his future inheritance, only to discover that Catherine had anticipated this move and frozen his access to all family financial resources. His independence, which had always been more theoretical than real, evaporated overnight. Olivia found herself isolated and increasingly desperate as the legal implications of Catherine's threats became clearer. The family's team of attorneys had indeed prepared documentation alleging misconduct, creating a paper trail that would follow her for years even if the charges were eventually dropped. The prospect of fighting a prolonged legal battle while pregnant and unemployed was overwhelming. The household staff faced their own crises, as Catherine began questioning their loyalty and reliability. She suspected that someone had been feeding information to David about her plans, and her investigation created an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust. Margaret received a formal warning about inappropriate involvement in family matters, while Thomas was told his contract might not be renewed due to declining performance standards. Timothy's emotional state deteriorated further under the increasing tension. He began having nightmares that left him crying for hours. His appetite disappeared completely, and he started having accidents despite being fully potty trained for years. The 6-year-old was clearly traumatized by the adult conflicts swirling around him, but Catherine remained focused on his external behavior rather than addressing the underlying emotional causes. Richard found himself caught between competing loyalties as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. His own financial dependence on his mother made rebellion impossible. But his genuine concern for David and growing respect for Olivia created internal conflict that manifested in increasingly erratic behavior. His attempts to mediate satisfied no one and alienated him from all sides. Catherine's campaign against Olivia intensified with surgical precision. She arranged for concerned friends to share stories about young women who had tried to trap wealthy men through pregnancy, creating a narrative that painted Olivia as a calculating opportunist rather than a genuine victim of circumstances. The social pressure was designed to make David question not just Olivia's motives, but his own judgment in trusting her. The isolation became nearly complete as former allies began distancing themselves from the controversy. Sarah, the younger maid, stopped offering support after receiving her own warning from Catherine. The groundskeeper became noticeably distant, clearly fearful for his own position. Even Margaret's support became more circumspect as the pressure on the staff increased. Olivia's health continued to decline under the extreme stress. Her obstetrician expressed serious concerns about the impact of psychological pressure on both mother and baby, recommending immediate steps to reduce stress and improve her emotional environment. The medical advice stood in stark contrast to Catherine's accelerating campaign of intimidation and psychological warfare. David's professional situation became equally precarious as Catherine's influence reached into his workplace. A formal complaint was filed with the medical board alleging unprofessional relationships and questionable judgment, requiring him to respond to official inquiries while managing his regular patient responsibilities. The investigation would take months to resolve, creating uncertainty about his career prospects. The financial pressure reached crushing levels as Catherine demonstrated the full extent of her control over family resources. David's credit cards were canceled. His apartment lease was called into question due to family guarantees, and his ability to support himself independently was systematically eliminated. The message was clear: complete submission or total destruction. Olivia realized she was witnessing the full power of generational wealth being weaponized against individuals who dared to challenge established hierarchies. Catherine's resources seemed infinite compared to her own limited options, creating a David and Goliath scenario where the outcome appeared predetermined. The system was designed to crush resistance and maintain control through economic pressure. Timothy became an unwitting casualty of the escalating conflict. His father, Richard, was too distracted by family politics to provide adequate emotional support, while Catherine's rigid approach only increased his distress. The boy began seeking out Olivia desperately, clinging to her as the only adult who seemed to understand his fears and confusion. Catherine's response to Timothy's attachment to Olivia was swift and brutal. She banned all unsupervised contact between them, claiming that Olivia was manipulating the child for emotional leverage. The separation caused Timothy to become even more withdrawn and anxious, his behavior spiraling as his primary source of comfort was removed. The legal documentation grew more threatening as Catherine's attorneys refined their strategy. They had constructed a case alleging that Olivia had used her position as household staff to gain unauthorized access to family information, had engaged in theft of personal property, and had attempted to extort money through false pregnancy claims. The allegations were creative fiction, but they carried enough legal weight to ruin Olivia's reputation permanently. David's attempts to fight back were systematically neutralized by his mother's superior resources and planning. Every lawyer he contacted had either worked for the family previously or had business relationships that created conflicts of interest. His ability to secure independent legal representation was blocked at every turn, leaving him dependent on attorneys who ultimately answered to Catherine. The emotional toll became visible in everyone involved. David lost weight and developed stress-related health issues that affected his surgical performance. Richard began drinking heavily, his own marriage falling apart under the pressure of family loyalty versus personal ethics. Even Catherine showed signs of strain, her usually perfect composure cracking under the intensity of maintaining multiple pressure campaigns simultaneously. Olivia reached her lowest point when the full scope of her isolation became clear. She had no financial resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, no employment prospects that wouldn't be sabotaged by Catherine's influence, and no family support system to fall back on. The pregnancy that should have been a source of joy had become the catalyst for systematic destruction of her entire life. The final blow came when Catherine arranged for a child welfare investigation, claiming concerns about Olivia's mental stability and ability to provide adequate care for an infant. The investigation would create official documentation of concerns about her parenting capacity, regardless of the eventual outcome. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare designed to break her spirit completely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Timothy's crisis reached a point that even Catherine couldn't ignore or control through traditional means. The 6-year-old had stopped eating entirely, hadn't slept properly in days, and had begun exhibiting signs of selective mutism that alarmed even his distracted father. When Richard brought him to the family doctor, the pediatrician insisted on immediate psychological evaluation, threatening to involve Child Protective Services if the family didn't address his obvious emotional trauma. The professional assessment delivered harsh truths that shattered Catherine's carefully constructed narrative about proper child rearing. The child psychologist identified Timothy's symptoms as classic indicators of severe anxiety and emotional distress, directly linked to instability in his family environment and lack of consistent emotional support. The report recommended immediate intervention and specifically noted that the child had mentioned feeling safe only. With Aunt Olivia, the household staff member who had shown him genuine care and understanding, Catherine's initial reaction was to dismiss the evaluation as professionally incompetent. But the doctor's credentials were impeccable and his recommendations carried legal weight given the ongoing custody dispute. Richard faced the prospect of losing his parenting time entirely. If he couldn't demonstrate adequate care for Timothy's emotional needs, the situation had evolved beyond family politics into genuine child welfare concerns that couldn't be manipulated away. David seized the opportunity to highlight the contrast between professional psychological assessment and his mother's rigid approach to child development. He had been documenting Timothy's decline throughout the crisis, building a case that Catherine's methods were not just ineffective, but actively harmful to child welfare. His medical training lent authority to his observations about the connection between environmental stress and childhood behavioral problems. Olivia found herself in the unique position of being the only adult Timothy trusted completely during his emotional crises. When the psychologist recommended that the boy spend time with someone who provided him emotional security while longer-term solutions were developed, Catherine was forced to acknowledge Olivia's importance to Timothy's immediate welfare. It was the first crack in her absolute authority over family decisions. The child welfare investigation that Catherine had initiated backfired spectacularly when investigators interviewed Timothy about his living situation and emotional needs. The boy's honest responses revealed the coldness and rigidity of Catherine's household management, while praising Olivia's kindness and understanding. The investigators found no evidence supporting concerns about Olivia's capacity for childcare, but identified serious questions about the emotional environment Timothy was experiencing. Margaret, the cook, finally broke her silence about the family dynamics she had observed over 15 years of employment. Her testimony to David's lawyer painted a detailed picture of Catherine's controlling behavior, the emotional neglect of the children in her care, and the stark contrast in Timothy's behavior when he was with Olivia versus other family members. Her insider perspective carried weight that external observers couldn't provide. The medical documentation about Olivia's pregnancy complications began telling a story that undermined Catherine's narrative about her emotional instability. David's careful records showed that Olivia's health problems correlated directly with increases in family stress and pressure, suggesting that her difficulties were environmental rather than inherent. The pattern supported claims of psychological abuse rather than natural incapacity. Thomas, the groundskeeper, came forward with information about Catherine's surveillance and intimidation tactics toward staff members. His documentation of threats and inappropriate monitoring painted a picture of workplace harassment that could expose the family to additional legal liability. The revelations shifted focus from Olivia's supposed inadequacies to Catherine's potentially illegal behavior toward employees. Richard's drinking problem became impossible to hide as the stress intensified, creating questions about his own fitness as a parent that complicated Catherine's position. The family couldn't simultaneously argue that Olivia was unfit for motherhood while ignoring Richard's obvious struggles with alcohol dependency. The double standard became too glaring to maintain credibly. Catherine's network of social and professional connections began working against her as more people witnessed her treatment of Olivia and the household staff. Several prominent families had experienced their own issues with her vindictive behavior over the years, and they quietly began sharing information that painted a pattern of bullying and manipulation that extended far beyond this single incident. The financial pressure that Catherine had applied so effectively began creating its own problems as David's inability to meet his professional and charitable commitments drew unwanted attention. His sudden withdrawal from ongoing medical research projects and community service activities prompted questions from colleagues about his family situation that Catherine couldn't control or contain. Olivia's transformation during this period was remarkable to observe. The isolation and pressure that were designed to break her spirit instead revealed an inner strength that surprised everyone, including herself. She began asserting herself more confidently, speaking up for Timothy's needs, and challenging assumptions about her capabilities with quiet but unmistakable authority. The pregnancy itself became a source of empowerment rather than vulnerability as Olivia embraced her protective instincts. Her growing connection with the unborn child gave her perspective on what really mattered, allowing her to see through Catherine's intimidation tactics to the fear and insecurity that drove them. She realized that Catherine's greatest weapon was psychological manipulation, which lost its power once its mechanisms were understood. Timothy's attachment to Olivia deepened as she became his primary source of emotional stability during the crisis. Their bond demonstrated her natural parenting abilities in ways that no amount of theoretical knowledge could provide. Even skeptical observers could see that the troubled child thrived under her care in ways that he didn't. With other family members, David's medical colleagues began offering support as they learned about the family pressure he was facing. Several department heads had dealt with Catherine's interference in hospital politics over the years, and were eager to provide assistance that would limit her influence in their professional environment. The support network that emerged gave David resources to fight back more effectively. The legal investigation into Catherine's allegations against Olivia began revealing the fabricated nature of many claims. Security footage, employment records, and witness testimony contradicted key elements of the accusations, creating questions about Catherine's credibility and motivations. The attempted frame-up became evidence of malicious prosecution rather than legitimate concerns about misconduct. The confrontation that changed everything erupted during a supervised visit with Timothy that had been ordered by the child psychologist. Catherine had arranged for the session to take place in the mansion's formal living room, surrounded by family members and legal representatives, clearly expecting Olivia to fail under scrutiny. Instead, what unfolded was a masterclass in child psychology that exposed the fundamental differences between genuine nurturing and manipulative control. Timothy arrived for the session in a state of near-complete emotional shutdown. He hadn't spoken to anyone except Olivia for 3 days, had refused all meals prepared by anyone else, and had been experiencing panic attacks whenever separated from her presence. Catherine's response had been to increase discipline and structure, completely missing the trauma responses that were obvious to anyone with psychological training. Olivia's approach was everything Catherine's wasn't: gentle, patient, and focused entirely on Timothy's emotional needs rather than external behavior. She sat with him on the floor rather than demanding he sit properly in a chair. She followed his lead in conversation rather than directing him toward topics adults wanted to discuss. She validated his feelings rather than correcting his expressions of distress. Within minutes of beginning their interaction, Timothy's transformation was visible to everyone in the room. His breathing regulated, his posture relaxed, and he began engaging in quiet conversation about his fears and concerns. Olivia listened without judgment, asked gentle questions that helped him process his emotions, and provided comfort that was clearly genuine rather than performed for observers. The breakthrough moment came when Timothy began talking about his nightmares, describing fears about adults disappearing and fighting that perfectly captured the trauma he had been experiencing during the family crisis. Olivia's responses demonstrated sophisticated understanding of childhood psychology, helping him distinguish between real and imaginary threats while providing tools for managing his anxiety. Catherine's attempt to interrupt and redirect the conversation toward more productive topics backfired completely. Timothy immediately became distressed, clinging to Olivia and begging her not to let the mean lady take him away. His reaction was so strong and immediate that even Catherine's supporters couldn't deny the impact of her presence on his emotional state. The child psychologist, who had been observing silently, stepped forward to address Catherine directly about her counterproductive interference. The professional confrontation was devastating, with the doctor explaining in clinical terms how Catherine's rigid approach was actively traumatizing Timothy and preventing his recovery from the family crisis. David seized the moment to present his carefully documented evidence about the correlation between Catherine's control and the family's dysfunction. His medical training allowed him to speak with authority about psychological abuse, childhood trauma, and the long-term impacts of emotional neglect. The presentation was delivered with surgical precision, dismantling Catherine's claims about proper child rearing with irrefutable professional evidence. Richard, witnessing his son's desperate attachment to Olivia and his terror of his grandmother, finally found the courage to speak truth to power. He admitted that Catherine's pressure had contributed to his drinking problem, his failed marriage, and his inability to provide adequate emotional support for Timothy. His confession broke the family's code of silence about Catherine's destructive influence. The legal representatives present began recognizing that their case had not only collapsed but had revealed potential liability for their client. Catherine's harassment of Olivia and the household staff, her interference with David's medical career, and her role in Timothy's psychological trauma created exposure to multiple lawsuits that could damage both her reputation and finances. Margaret stepped forward to provide testimony that devastated Catherine's credibility completely. 15 years of observation had given her unique insight into the family dynamics, and her detailed account of Catherine's treatment of children, staff, and family members painted an undeniable picture of systematic emotional abuse disguised as traditional values. The medical evidence about Olivia's pregnancy complications became impossible to ignore when presented alongside the timeline of Catherine's harassment campaign. David's documentation showed direct correlation between stressful incidents and health problems, supporting claims of deliberate psychological abuse that endangered both mother and child. Catherine's social network began abandoning her as the scope of her vindictive behavior became public knowledge. Several prominent families who had experienced her manipulation and intimidation tactics came forward with their own stories, creating a pattern of conduct that destroyed her carefully maintained reputation for propriety and social leadership. Timothy's voice became the most powerful evidence of all when he spoke directly to the assembled adults about his fear of Catherine and his trust in Olivia. His innocent honesty cut through all the legal maneuvering and social positioning to reveal the simple truth. He felt safe with Olivia and terrified of his grandmother's coldness and anger. The financial pressure that Catherine had wielded so effectively became a liability when investigators began examining her use of family resources to harass employees and interfere with David's career. The documentation revealed patterns of behavior that could constitute criminal harassment and abuse of power, creating legal exposure that threatened her control over family assets. Olivia's final transformation was complete when she addressed Catherine directly, speaking not as a subordinate seeking permission, but as an equal defending her family. Her words were measured and dignified, but they carried unmistakable strength and authority. She had evolved from invisible domestic worker to confident woman claiming her place in the family hierarchy. The moment of Catherine's complete defeat came when she realized that continuing her campaign would result in loss of custody for Richard, criminal charges for harassment, and social exile from the community she had spent decades cultivating. Her choice was simple: accept Olivia's place in the family or lose everything she had worked to build. 6 months later, the mansion that had been a battlefield of wills had transformed into something approaching a functional family home. Catherine sat in the garden, watching Olivia teach Timothy how to plant seeds in the herb garden while her newborn grandson slept peacefully in his carrier beside them. The scene that once would have enraged her now filled her with unexpected peace. Though the path to this moment had required her to confront truths about herself that had taken decades to acknowledge. The birth of David Alexander Blackwood III had been the catalyst for Catherine's final transformation. When complications during delivery required emergency intervention, she had witnessed David's agony at the prospect of losing both Olivia and their son. In that hospital waiting room, surrounded by the consequences of her own actions, Catherine faced the reality that her pursuit of control had nearly cost her everything that actually mattered. Olivia's strength during the crisis had impressed even her harshest critics. Despite facing life-threatening complications, she had remained focused on the baby's welfare, making decisions with calm clarity that demonstrated the maternal instincts Catherine had spent months trying to prove didn't exist. The doctors and nurses who cared for her spoke admiringly of her grace under pressure and natural ability to prioritize what truly mattered. Timothy's recovery had been remarkable once the family dynamic stabilized and he received consistent emotional support. The selective mutism disappeared, his eating patterns normalized, and his sleep improved dramatically. His bond with Olivia had deepened into genuine family connection, and he had begun calling her Aunt Livy with the unconscious ease of a child who had found his place in the world. Richard's journey towards sobriety had been supported by the family's new commitment to honesty and emotional health. With Timothy's welfare no longer threatened by family politics, he had been able to focus on addressing his drinking problem and rebuilding his relationship with his son. His ex-wife had even commented on the positive changes in Timothy's behavior during visits, crediting the stability of his extended family environment. David's career had not only survived Catherine's sabotage, but had flourished once the family pressure was removed. His research into childhood trauma and its long-term effects had gained national attention, partly because of his personal experience with family dysfunction and recovery. The medical community's support during his crises had evolved into lasting professional relationships that enhanced his impact in pediatric medicine. The household staff had experienced their own liberation as Catherine learned to treat employees as human beings rather than invisible servants. Margaret had been promoted to household manager with real authority over daily operations. Thomas had been given resources to expand the gardens into therapeutic spaces for Timothy and other family members. Sarah had returned to school with family funding for her education in early childhood development. Catherine's social rehabilitation had been more challenging but ultimately more meaningful than her previous superficial prominence. Her public acknowledgement of mistakes and commitment to family healing had earned respect from people who valued authenticity over appearances. She had resigned from several boards and committees, focusing instead on understanding and supporting her family's actual needs. The legal resolution had been swift once Catherine stopped fighting and started cooperating. All charges against Olivia were dropped with formal apologies. David's medical board investigation was closed without findings, and the family had established a fund to compensate household staff for the harassment they had endured. The financial settlements were substantial enough to demonstrate genuine remorse rather than mere legal maneuvering. Olivia's transformation from invisible domestic worker to acknowledged family member had been formalized through her marriage to David in a small ceremony that reflected their values rather than social expectations. Timothy had been the ring-bearer, his joy at officially becoming part of their family unit visible to everyone present. The ceremony had been held in the garden where they had first fallen in love, symbolizing growth from hidden romance to public commitment. The baby's presence had softened Catherine in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. Little Alex had inherited his father's gentle nature and his mother's observant intelligence, responding to everyone around him with the openness that only secure children possess. Catherine's interactions with him were careful and tentative, but they were also genuine in ways that her previous relationships with children had never been. Timothy's role as big cousin had given him purpose and confidence that transformed his entire personality. He helped with feeding, played quietly near the baby during nap times, and had appointed himself as protector and teacher of all things important. His emotional maturity had developed rapidly once he felt secure in his family relationships and valued for his contributions. The mansion itself had been restructured to accommodate its new reality as a multi-generational family home rather than Catherine's pristine showcase. Child safety measures had been installed, play areas had been created, and the formal spaces had been softened to welcome the messiances of real family life. The changes reflected deeper shifts in priorities and values that affected every aspect of daily living. Catherine's relationship with Olivia remained complex, but was built on growing mutual respect rather than the hostility that had characterized their early interactions. Olivia's grace and victory, her willingness to forgive and include. Catherine in family life, despite the harm she had caused, had demonstrated maturity that forced Catherine to reconsider her assumptions about character and class. The garden conversations between Catherine and Olivia had become a regular feature of family life. Opportunities for the older woman to share her experiences while learning from perspectives she had never considered. These talks had revealed Catherine's own history of being judged and found wanting by her husband's family, creating unexpected common ground between women from vastly different backgrounds. David's joy in fatherhood was evident to everyone around him. his natural affinity for children, honed through years of pediatric medicine, found perfect expression in caring for his son while supporting Olivia's adjustment to motherhood. Their partnership in parenting demonstrated the kind of equal collaboration that Catherine's generation had rarely experienced or understood. The extended family's future looked promising in ways that went beyond financial security or social status. Timothy's emotional health was stable. Richard's sobriety was supported by family understanding. David's career was thriving. And Catherine had found purpose in supporting, rather than controlling, the people she loved. The baby's arrival had given everyone a fresh start and renewed hope for building something better together. As Catherine watched Olivia's natural ease with Timothy and little Alex, she finally understood what genuine nurturing looked like: patient, observant, responsive to individual needs, rather than imposed expectations. The young woman she had tried so hard to dismiss had become the family's emotional center, teaching them all lessons about love, forgiveness, and the courage to grow beyond their limitations. The transformation was complete, but ongoing. A commitment to choosing growth over stagnation, love over control, and authentic connection over superficial appearances. In the garden where so much healing had taken place, 3 generations of the Blackwood family were learning to bloom together. Rooted in soil enriched by honesty, forgiveness, and the revolutionary power of choosing to change.